Right.
Exactly, chapter 20, not 19. So chapter 20 begins, Vayihi le'et tshuvat hashana. At the turn of the year, le'et tzeit hamlachim, when the kings would go out. Back when we discussed this in the book of Shmuel and maybe other places, I said it's like when the snow and ice thaws in Norway and in the other Scandinavian countries, and the Vikings would go out to raid, to pillage, etc. Vayinhag Yoav et chel hatzava, and Yoav led out the army force. Well, where is David? Why is Yoav going? Vayashchet et eretz b'nei Amon vayavo vayatzar et Rabbah v'David yoshev b'Yerushalayim vayach Yoav et Rabbah vayeherseha. So Yoav leads out the troops into the land of Ammon. We talked about problems with Ammon the other day, and Ammon brought in Aram, and Aram brought in their reinforcements, and those reinforcements were defeated. But Ammon still seems maybe to be a little bit of a problem, and so we lay siege to Rabbah. David is in Jerusalem, and Yoav reduces Rabbah to ruins. Now, this story is told as well to us in the 11th chapter of the book of Shmuel. It starts out in the same with the same words. And then in chapter 11 it says Vaishlach David et Yoav et Avadav imo et Kol Yisrael, and here it just says Vayinhag Yoav et Chel Hatzava, right? And the verse ends in the same sort of in the same way. It says in the verse there, Vayashchitu et bnei Amon vayatzuru al Rabbah v'David yoshev b'Yerushalayim, and here it says Vayavo vayatzar et Rabbah v'David yoshev b'Yerushalayim vayach Yoav et Rabbah vayeherseha. So here the entire battle takes one verse. The destruction of Rabbah happens right away. In the book of Shmuel, it is what happens during that battle and during the time that David is Yoshev B'Yerushalayim. And in that chapter, right? In that chapter, it says David sent them out and David stayed back. And here, it's Yoav takes them out. So the chapter is continuing with many of the words that we have in the first chapter, but it's missing by far the most important element of that chapter, and in many ways, the most important element and moment in David's life. This is the time in his life. It's during that battle against Ammon when David sees a woman bathing on the roof, and he decides to go and to sleep with her, even though he's told she's a married woman, and it causes a whole downfall of his affair with Bathsheba. It's not here at all. Again, we've said it many times. This is a book. Chronicles make the Davidic kingdom look great, inspire the people of the fledgling Second Temple period, let them know that they are from great stock. Jerusalem, the temple, the Davidic dynasty, all of this will be restored in its splendor and its glory. And the last thing we want to do is to show the great stain of the life of David. And so here it's just empty. And look at verse 2. ויקח דוד את עטרת מלכה מעל ראשו, וימצאה משקל כיכר זהב, ובאבן יקרה ותהי על ראש דוד, ושלל העיר הוציא הרבה מאוד. David took the crown from the head of their king, found that it weighed a talent of gold, and in it were precious stones. It was placed on David's head. He also carried off a vast amount of booty from the city. So does that mean David went to the battle? He went when they were finishing up the battle, and he was there. Does it mean when the people brought it to him and he put it on his head? But here he is. There's no mention. Vayasar b'magera v'charitzei barzel v'magerot v'chein yaseh David l'chol harei b'nei Ammon v'yashav David v'chol am Yerushalayim. He led out the people who lived there and hacked them with saws and iron and threshing boards and axes. Not a very nice visual. And David did this to all the towns of Ammon, and then David and his troops returned to Jerusalem. So that verse, or at least the first half of that verse, are told to us in chapter 12, verses 30 and 31 in the book of Shmuel. So in our book, it encompasses 3 verses. In the book of Shmuel, it encompasses 2 chapters, because we start with the war of Ammon. We have the Bathsheba affair. We have her getting pregnant. We have her, right, Uriah Hittite coming back and all of that. And David trying to get him drunk and sleep with his wife. And then him going and David's having him sent on a kamikaze mission. And then Natan Hanavi coming to David and telling him, about the man who had a lot of sheep and lived up on the hill, and there was a poor man who had one sheep, and somebody visited the great man, and the great man didn't want to give up his sheep, so he took the sheep from the other man and slaughtered and fed it to his guests. All that is missing. It's a very difficult retelling of the story, because it misses the most important parts. And then it's like nothing happens in verse 4. Vatamod milchama b'gezer in plishtim azika sibchai hachushati et sipai miyodei arifaim vayichnehu. So what happens after that is that David goes and he goes and he battles against the plishtim. And right in Gezer, and tells us about different people who were killed. One is a descendant of the Riphaim, and they were greatly humbled by their loss and defeat. And that's later on in the book of Shmuel. That's not until the 21st chapter or so. Vatiod milchama et plishtim in verse 5. Vayach Elchanan ben Yair et lachmi. Achi Goliath Hagiti ve'etz chanito kiminor orgim. And again, there was fighting with the Philistines, and Elchanan, the son of Yair, killed Lachmi, the brother of Goliath. The Gittite, his spear had a shaft like a weaver's beam. And so we're told about this later on as well, as sort of in a summation of some of the wars of David later on in the 21st chapter. Vatiod milchama begat vayish midav etzbotav shisha sheish vashesh esrim va'arba v'gam hu nolad laharafa. Once again, there was fighting at Gath. There was a giant of a man who had 24 fingers and toes, 6 on each hand and 6 on each foot, and he too was descended from Rapha. And of course, this is in that same chapter where we talk about many of David's wars in verse 20, chapter 21 in Shmuel. Vayacharef et Yisrael vayakeu Yehonatan ben Shema achi David. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of David's brother, Shimeah, killed him. That's what we're told. Who defeated them, sort of acting in a way that's where our chapter ends. That summarizes a number of the battles of David without, right. It's missing the key element. There's no way to deal with it. There are some slight discrepancies there. Elchanan kills Lachmi, Goliath's brother, and here Elchanan kills Goliath, the Gittite. Is that the same Goliath as the adult's names? We of course know David kills Goliath, but really the difference here is that the major episode of David's life is not here. It's just it's missing, and it is shocking that it is missing. And again, it tells us about the description of the book in terms of what it's trying to do. Pump up the Davidic family, pump up the idea of the temple, etc., etc. And it is a very difficult chapter to consider and to think about, because it's short because of all the things that it's missing, and really asks questions as to how do we retell stories. Do we tell them honestly? Do we fabricate things? Sometimes we forget things or we change things. There's a podcast from Malcolm Gladwell in his Revisionist History a number of years back, where he talked about the media, the newsman Brian Williams, that Brian Williams claimed he was on a helicopter that got shot at in Afghanistan. And he wasn't on a helicopter that was shot at in Afghanistan, and his whole career was ruined. And he has brings in all sorts of stories and studies that sometimes people can make mistakes, because over time memory fades and memory changes stories, and you incorporate maybe somebody else's story into your story, and you don't even realize that you're lying. That's not what's going on here. This is not some sort of different version of the story like we have back in the book of Dvarim, where we have the retelling of the story of the spies, where in the book of Dvarim, it says the people came to Moshe and asked for spies, and then God said, send them. In the book of Bamidbar, when we first have the story in Parshat Shlach, God just says to Moshe, you're right, send spies, ve'aturu et haaretz, and let them go and tour the land and see if where we will be able to defeat them. So is it a retelling? Is it just we're changing the version of the story? Is Moshe purposely changing it? Did he forget exactly what happened? Does he want to blame Bnei Yisrael versus the way it's told originally in Bamidbar? Or in Bamidbar, was he not telling the full story? There, we don't know. There are a lot of interesting, intriguing questions to ask about that retelling where the details are very different and the beginning of the story is very, very different. But here, it's a real challenge to think about. When we retell the stories of people, what do we include and what do we omit? And why do we omit certain things? What is our purpose? And we certainly understand the purpose of the author of the book of Divrei Hayamim here.